Yes, hello and welcome. My name is Will Fitzpatrick. I'm the Community Engagement Officer at the Tree Council for our Hedgerows project, Talk to Hedge. And I'm here with Jon Stokes, our Director of Tree Science and Research, for our Hedge Talk, the Easy Treesy Beginner's Guide to Trees, Shrubs and Climbers in our hedgerows. So it's all about giving you some of the skills and knowledge to identify some of the most common hedgerow trees, shrubs and climbers. No, we're not going to cover all the trees, tree species that you might find because we could be here for weeks. But we're going to try and give you some of the basics so you can get out there and try and discover what's in your local hedgerow. The talk's going to last about 45 minutes and we'll have a question and answers time at the very end. So if you've got any questions at all, pop them in the question and answer function at the bottom and we'll try and get round to them. And if you want to pop up on the chat and just tell us where you're all watching from today, that would also be great. But before we get cracking, I'd like to introduce who we, the Tree Council, are and what we do and what our hedgerow project is all about. So we're a national charity and we like to bring everyone together for the love of trees. We fund, plant and care for trees, and we do this through our amazing volunteers and through our community grant schemes. And that's not just individual trees, that could be orchards, hedgerows, you name it. We aim to inspire the next generation of environmentalists through our national schools programme, and we influence national policy with practical science and research, and work closely with our incredible partners to create a healthier, greener future for ourselves, our wildlife and the planet. So following on from the success of our Close the Gap project, National Hedgerow Week is part of our ongoing project Talk to the Hedge. This is a 3-year programme which aims to benefit biodiversity, climate change and the green economy by increasing the quality and quantity of our rural and urban hedgerows all across England. It's a programme that we're leading, and we're working in close partnership with Farms and Wildlife Advisory Group, the People's Trust for Endangered Species, the National Hedge Laying Society and Another Way. And we're being funded by the Trees Call to Action Fund, which is being delivered by the National Lottery Heritage Fund, and that's been developed by DEFRA in partnership with the Forestry Commission. If you want more information about anything we do, you can go to our website on www.treecouncil.org.uk, or you can go to HedgeLink at www.hedgelink.org.uk for everything hedge related. So in the meantime, let's get stuck into our hedge talk. So Jon, can you talk to us about what the different components are of a hedge? If I'm looking at hedge, what am I looking at?
Yes, thank you, Will. So what we're going to do, folks, tonight is we're going to go through, as Will said, we're going to go through some tree ID, but we thought we'd start by giving you some elements of the hedge. So when you're thinking about a hedge, there are a number of different layers, and in each of the different layers there might be different species. So we've got the tree layer. The tree layer is those trees that are sticking out above what you might conventionally think of as the hedge. But a hedge is actually a series of shrubs growing along, often in a straight line, in a line across the landscape. Then there's the margin. The margin is the flowers, the grasses, the herbaceous plants that are growing towards the outside edge of the hedge. Then there's the base, which is the bottom of the hedge. Sometimes has a different flora from the margins. And in many hedges, there is often a ditch. And each of these different layers can have different species. And what we're going to try and do tonight is to give you a flavour of what these different species are and how you identify them. But one of the really difficult things to get your head around is the difference between a tree and a shrub. Do you want to? Should we go into that a bit, Will? Would that be helpful, do you think?
Yeah, I think that sounds good to me, Jon. So how would I tell the difference between what we'd call a tree and what we'd call a shrub?
So I don't know if you know what do you know what the legal definition of a tree is?
No, I'm sure you can tell me.
So it's not a trick question. It actually took an awful lot of lawyers. There is a thing called a tree preservation order. It's a legal protection for a tree. And to be able to come up with a legal protection of a tree, they had to define what a tree was. So all the best legal minds sat around and they came up with the definition of a tree. And a tree is, quotes, anything one would ordinarily think of as a tree, close quotes. That is actually the legal definition of a tree. Anything one would ordinarily think of as a tree. And the thing is that trees and shrubs are actually, they're just a woody species that has been managed or grown in different ways. So there really isn't a huge amount of difference between a tree and a shrub. Maybe their ultimate height sometimes, but it's not that easy. It's not that simple to separate them out. And so the shrub layer is really a group of trees that is waiting to grow up. It's just been managed down. Yes, see Leslie's comment. It is quite daft, the law sometimes. The layer of shrubs is basically a group of trees waiting to grow. If you stop cutting them, they will grow up and become mature trees. If you were to take these trees and cut them down, they would appear in a shrubby form. So there isn't really a huge amount of difference, but we think of trees and shrubs as different things. And actually, one of the most difficult questions to ask in Britain is how many native tree species are there? Because each one of those words need defining. What's native, what's the tree, and what's a species? And in there we have somewhere between 33 and 96 different native tree species, depending upon whether you think of it as a tree or a shrub growing in the British Isles, which is not that many. Even at the extremes, it's not that many. But for most people, there's only about 30 or 40 species that they're actually likely to find in any tree and hedge, in any hedge that is either a tree or a shrub.
Okay, I think that probably takes us quite nicely onto then how we might identify different species. But I'm going to be annoying and actually ask you, what is a species before we do that?
So what is a species is really complicated because it depends on all sorts of things. So there are commonly thought of as two oak trees in the country. There's sessile oak and pedunculate oak. We'll come on to what they are later. But they're thought of as two species. The truth is that they can hybridize and they can produce fertile progeny, fertile offspring, anywhere on the spectrum between the two trees. The absolute middle point is called a rose oak, and a rose oak is a hybrid between a 50-50 hybrid between the two. Now that one's thought of not as a species but as a hybrid, but sometimes that hybridization creates something that's unique or distinctive or genetically different. And the most complicated version of this in a British context are what are called the sorbuses. Now, sorbuses is probably better known to most people. The white beam, the rowan, and the wild service tree. Those are the three common sorbuses. And they mix up their genetics, and their genetics becomes really, really complicated. And so a rowan can cross with a white beam and produce something. And those things are often called species. So the biggest number of rare trees we have in Britain are hybrids between those species. And there are nearly 50 of those really rare hybrids. Some call them species, some call them hybrids. But some of the rarest trees in Europe grow in Britain and are those mixes. And many of those grow in hedges, particularly if you're in Wales, if you're in Devon, if you're up the west coast of the UK. So actually a species is a really difficult thing to do. But if we were to look at these features that you've got on the screen, what was the word I said about hybrids? No, I'm not sure what can you remember, anybody, what the word was? I'll explain it if I didn't make myself plain. What you see on the screen in front of you is the different things that you can use to identify a tree. The thing is that the one that everybody thinks is useful, tree form, is actually often the least useful, because as we've just been discussing, the way a thing is managed affects how it grows in a hedge or anywhere else. It can be cut, it can be trimmed, it can be cut in all sorts of ways, and that will change its form. A tree growing in a woodland will look entirely different from a tree growing in a hedge. Although, having said all of that, the best place to see the true shape of a tree is often in a hedgerow, because like the one here, they grow out in full space and they get full light. So then they develop their natural shape. But tree form is actually not a very useful characteristic, except for those mature hedgerow trees. The other bits on this slide, however, are so leaves, buds, bark, flowers, and fruit. These are the things that can help you to identify easily all the different trees. And as I say, there's only, most of you will probably only see 30 or 40 species. So what you need is 30 or 40 individual characteristics that are really good for that tree. And once you've got that in your head, it becomes very simple. And the obvious one here is bark. So in the middle there, you've got the bark of a beech tree. And the bark of a beech tree is smooth and grey and really, really looks like the skin of an elephant. And once you've seen the bark of a beech tree, you don't need to worry about almost anything else. That one characteristic will help you identifying the beeches from anything else. And it's finding those one characteristics for all the species that you need that will really help you to identify trees simply. It is very easy and always good fun.
I think what we can say here as well is that today, we might have worried a few people here, we're not going to start looking at how we're going to identify really difficult hybrids. We are going to be looking at some of the most common things that you can find and easy ways that you can kind of tell them apart. So when I go out and I'm looking at the different species, I find it really useful to have a guide, and I kind of have one in my back pocket and I can refer to it. Would you recommend any good ones? I've got my personal preference. I know you've got a different one. What would you recommend?
There are lots and lots of tree books. My favourite of all of them that's been produced over the years is the very, very old Reader's Digest Book of Trees, published in the mid-70s. It still is the best tree ID book out there. Other than that, it depends on personal preference. There are lots of different, there's the Collins tree book, which is full of all sorts of trees and maybe too complicated for most people. There's the Tree Growers Guide, which I see behind you on the back of the shelf, which is a really simple one produced by ourselves at the Tree Council, and you can find that on our website, which has got all of the trees that you might find and shrubs that you might find in a hedgerow, and that's got some simple ID characteristics. So it's a really personal choice thing, but I would suggest you all try and find the Reader's Digest Book of Trees. Even it's out of print, but you can sometimes pick it up on eBay or on Amazon or any of those sort of places for less than a couple of pounds, and it's money well spent.
Okay, so I think what we might do then is that we will start looking at some of our most common smaller species and what might generally kind of make up the bulk of a hedge when we look at it. So I think we'll look at some hawthorn, blackthorn, elder, hazel, and holly first, and then you might be able to throw a couple in as well. And I believe you've got some samples that you've managed to collect.
I went out in the garden and down the hedge just by the side of the house, and no trees were harmed in the preparation of this webinar. We took a few leaves that will help us to hopefully help you to identify the different species. So what would you like to start with, Will?
Could we go for hawthorn? I think that's one of the most common hedgerows.
So hopefully everybody will be able to see this. This is a hawthorn, and hawthorn is very distinctive. It has these little lobed leaves about the size of your thumbnail, really not that big. In the spring, it has often huge masses of white flowers, and then in the autumn, it produces these very distinctive red berries, distinctly red berries at this time of year. There isn't really much that you can mistake hawthorn. It's the commonest of all the hedgerow shrubs. It's everywhere. It's covered in these beautiful berries at the moment, and they're everywhere, absolutely everywhere. There is another species. There are actually two species of hawthorn in the British Isles. They're sometimes difficult to tell apart, particularly if you've only got the leaves. But there's one very, very simple way to tell the two apart, particularly in the autumn, and that's by getting hold of a berry and just squeezing the seed out. And what happens is that hawthorn, its Latin name for hawthorn is Crataegus monogyna. You don't need to know the Latin, but monogyna means one seed. So hawthorn has one seed in those berries. The other one, which is called Midland hawthorn, which is more of a woodland hawthorn than than ordinary hawthorn. Midland hawthorn has 2 seeds. So if you squeeze the berry, it will have 2 seeds in the middle. And that is absolutely the easiest way to tell the two apart. 1 seed, common English hawthorn, common hawthorn. 2 seeds is the Midland hawthorn. And once you've got that, they're very, very simple. So lots of flowers in the spring, and the flowers of hawthorn come out after the leaves. So if you've got leaves and you've got white flowers, then that is a hawthorn. Yes? Oh, you're muted, Will, I think.
I think I'm following. And there's another one, isn't there, which does the opposite. So it flowers when it's not in leaf.
That's right, exactly. So the other one, which comes out a bit earlier, is blackthorn. And this is a blackthorn. It has a very different leaf. It has a simple, round, oval leaf. No, let me take the leaf off. No edges, just a simple plain oval. And this one, in the spring, produces its flowers, as you said, before the leaves come out. So these come out in March. The white flowers come out on the twigs. Very simple leaves then develop. And in the autumn, they produce these fruits, dark bluish fruits. I think hopefully you can see this one. There's only one here, which is called a sloe. And you might have made sloe gin. You might have collected them when you were out foraging. We had a brilliant talk from a forager the other night. But sloe gin is a really beautiful thing. So yes, you're right. In the spring, flowers first, no leaves, blackthorn, leaves, and then flowers, hawthorn. So those are the 2 commonest hedgerow shrubs that you might find out there.
And they are the most common, aren't they? Because they do so well in the hedgerow, but they were the ones that stopped sheep, cattle, whatever, getting out. That's right, isn't it?
That's right. So they were the easiest one to manage. They were the easiest ones to control. They clip, they shape, you can do almost anything with them. So particularly in the Midlands, where there was a lot of hedges created during the 1700s and 1800s in what was called the Enclosure Act, all of those planned hedges across the middle of England, they're largely hawthorn with a little bit of blackthorn just thrown in. Other parts of the country where you've got older hedges, you might have a variety of other things, but certainly the bulk of hedges are one of those 2 species.
Okay, and what about, I know you've also got one of the foragers' favourites, you've got an elder there, haven't you?
Yes, so elder is another. Elder has a very different leaf. So this is an elder leaf. That's all 1 leaf. So that's called a compound leaf. And you don't need to know the botany of it, but basically it's a leaf made of lots of little leaflets. So that is 1 whole leaf, just made up of little parts. An elder is very distinctive. It has a bit of an unpleasant smell. And there are not that many leaves that have this form that you can mix elder up with. It also has hollow stems. So if you snap a twig, the stem is hollow, which is why they used to make a lot of penny whistles out of them. My dad used to make me whistles as a kid of the hollows of an elder. And it's a real skill. But if you can do it, it makes the most beautiful little penny whistle for children. I have a video of somebody doing it, which we might share one day, which is a fantastic thing on how to make a penny whistle from an elder branch. Okay,
and apart from the leaves, how else what are the other key ways that be able to look at or tell an elder?
So elder has very distinct flat plates almost of white flowers in the spring, and those flat plates of white flowers turn into blackberries. Have you got the picture of an elder? We'll just pop that on the screen for folks to see.
There we go.
Thank you. So you can see an elder has this big flat top of white flowers, and then at this time of year they turn into these blackberries. And of course, most of you, I'm sure, will have tried elderflower cordial, which is fabulous, made literally from the flowers of the elder. And then if this time of the year you can make elderflower jellies and jams and even elderberry chutney, which is really very nice. And again, as I've seen some of you talking about foraging, watch the event from 2 nights ago when we had this fabulous chap called Dave who does brilliant foraging, and he'll give you all sorts of ideas of things that you can do with elder. So that's elder. All right,
that's elder. What else have we got?
So the other one that you might have in a hedge, particularly if you're in the east of England, is this. And this is a very distinctive, big, round, almost sort of small dinner plate sized leaf. This is the hazel. And hazel leaves have this distinctive shape with lots of little ridges going around the outside. But the important thing about these is they're really, really soft. They're almost like, they're hairy and velvety and really quite tactile. They feel lovely to touch. And the only thing that you're ever really going to mix the hazel up with is this. And this, they come in all sorts of different sizes, but this is an elm leaf, which, as you can see, is sort of similar in shape. It's the only thing that you really might make a mistake of. But elm is very distinctive in that the base of the leaf is different. I don't know if you can see clearly, it's not that clear on this one, but it has asymmetric leaf. It has, the leaf base comes in at a different height on one side to the other. It's not a particularly good leaf to show that one. Let's see. Oh, this one's better. So can you see how different the two sides of the leaf are? This one comes in all the way up here, and this side of the leaf starts all the way down here. So it's called asymmetric leaf bases, and that's the technical way of spotting the difference. But actually, it's much simpler than that. This one is very smooth. Rub it on your cheek. This one feels really, really soft. If you rub an elm leaf on your cheek, it feels like sandpaper, and it's not something you want to do very often. And it's the simplest way to tell elm from hazel, the two things that you might confuse, by just literally getting them and touching them on your face, and then it's easy.
I think somebody said that they quite often get confused between alder and hazel.
So I think
I've done that as well.
I haven't got an alder leaf here, but alder leaves are basically round, completely round. I don't know if you got a picture of one there, Will.
I haven't got a picture of one up here, but I always remember they've got a round with a almost heart shaped.
And I have to vandalize this leaf, but the difference between the two is that hazel has a tip that I've just torn off, pointed. Alder does not. Alder has a round shape like this with an indentation in the middle. And again, if you remember that indentation, it's the simplest way to spot an alder leaf from all the others. So soft, rough. My cheek now starts to hurt. It often does if you rub elm on it. Don't do it too often. It's not a good idea. And alder is like a hazel, but with the top torn off. And there's a nice example also of the nuts. And at this time of year, hazelnuts, if the squirrels haven't got it to them already, then hazelnuts are obviously a very distinctive thing that you find on hazel, which you don't find on elm.
Yeah, and the cuteness overloads.
Yes.
But also, exactly. They feed things like the hazel dormice.
They do. And hazel dormice are the cutest things in the countryside, as far as I'm concerned. And tomorrow night we have another presentation by a good friend of mine called Ian, who is going to tell you all about dormice and why that hedges matter to dormice.
Okay, and we've got one more of the slightly shrubbier, smaller species. What would you like? It's another prickly one.
Okay.
It's holly. How would we? I think a lot of people will know holly when they see it.
I think everybody will know holly when they see it. I'm sorry, the light's a bit harsh on that because it's a bit reflective. Can you see the shiny, prickly lobes of a holly? I think everybody's going to know what a holly is.
Yes, I think so.
The thing that most people may not know about holly is that holly only grows prickles when it's relatively young. What do we mean by holly that's relatively young? Well, a holly that's less than 100 years old can have prickles. But once they get old, and once they get more than 100 years old, they frequently stop and they produce leaves without prickles. So this is off the same tree. It's about 120 years old. And you can see there are leaves with prickles and there are leaves without prickles. The tree decides whether or not it needs defending. This prickle is about defense against grazing. And as the tree gets older and bigger, it realizes that it doesn't, it realizes that it doesn't need those prickles. And so it literally stops growing them because it's got so many leaves and it's got so old that it doesn't bother to produce prickles, because growing prickles takes energy. And if you've got enough leaves, you don't need to bother. So you stop producing, I
guess that probably means then that hedgerow hollies are generally going to be prickly because we're not allowing them to grow bigger.
Exactly. Hedgerow hollies will generally be prickly. Somebody's asked how old are the oldest hollies? Well, we know some to be at least 400 years old. There's a beech in Kent with a hollywood growing on that's thought to be 400, 450 years old. And they are much, much older than you might imagine. They're one of the slowest growing of our native trees, incredibly hard wood, incredibly known as English ebony because it's really, really hard wood and it takes stain beautifully well. And one of those curious things, you see, holly has male and female flowers. Well, all trees have male and female flowers, but not necessarily on the same tree. Holly is one of the group of species that has male and female trees. And one of the most frequently asked questions is, why is my holly tree not flowering? Why is not producing berries? Well, the reason for that will be that it will be a male tree and cannot produce berries because it's a male tree. Most trees have both flowers with both sexes on the same tree, or they have different flowers of both sexes on the same tree. Some trees have the two trees as male and female trees, and holly is one of those.
Okay.
Actually, somebody says in holly, Spain, there's a 620-year-old holly. If you know where it is, Leslie, I'd really, really like to go and see that. So these pictures are from the Tree Growers Guide that we referred to earlier, that you will be able to download from the 17th from our website, or if you want a hard copy, you can buy it from our shop.
Okay, and we can see here as well how nice big holly hedges can get, and all the berries on them as well.
One of those little bits of British mythology in Herefordshire, I think James is on here tonight, he can tell me why it might be. In Herefordshire, it was said, and Worcestershire, it was said that they used to grow a lot of hollies to stop the witches from running along the top of the hedges. So you grow hollies to stop the witches from. Why witches would want to run along the top of your hedges, I've no idea. But apparently there was a particular problem up there in Herefordshire. There's also a unique style of holly hedges, which is around Woburn in Hertfordshire. And there's large areas of the countryside out there that has almost entirely holly hedges. It's a very unique, sort of locally specific form of hedge to around Woburn and other parts of Hertfordshire.
Brilliant. I think that's covered some of the most common hedgerow smaller species and shrubbier things.
So I'm going to take the question from Peter while it's just come up. How significant is the infection risk from a blackthorn? So I'd like to say, Peter, not really, but I'd be lying. And I'd be lying because I nearly died myself of sepsis as a result of a blackthorn spike. And what happens with blackthorn particularly is that they can, not always, but they can have quite heavy concentrations of bacteria on the tip of the spine. And because it's a spiny bush, you can frequently stick yourself with blackthorn. I've done it thousands, hundreds of thousands of times. hedge laying, tree planting, a whole range of things. So it is not common. But on one occasion, I got a stick from a blackthorn that was meant. I was walking along one day with my wife. I was feeling perfectly fine, sat down, and then couldn't get up again. Felt so ill that I literally couldn't get on. It came on in just over 10 minutes. Had to get an ambulance to get me out because I couldn't move. Was in hospital for days afterwards, being treated for sepsis. I didn't realise that it was how serious sepsis was at the time. I discover now it's very serious, and it's it can be fatal. So fortunately in my case it wasn't, but it can. So the answer to the question, how significant is the risk, is that it is a small risk, but if it happens, it can be very serious, and I know that from personal experience.
You also spend more time than most in blackthorn hedges, Jon.
True, I do have a bit of a problem of lurking around in hedges, so it may not be as common as all that, but I wouldn't let it stop you in blackthorns, and I certainly wouldn't let it stop you enjoying a sloe gin, which is an absolute favourite of mine.
Yeah, absolutely. Brilliant. I think we could move on to some of our slightly larger species then, because I know you've got various leaves on there. Because we do know that hedges aren't always small. We do have hedgerow trees, some big mature trees, but equally some of those bigger species like we've got here, oak and ash and things like that, they can actually be managed as hedges as well. So could you give us a bit of a run through of some of your leaves?
I could, and Catherine's just said some of the aces, trying to ID aces is so hard. So I'm going to start, as Catherine's put it in the chat, we'll start with the aces. And aces are basically maples. And actually, Catherine, I disagree. I think maples are actually quite easy when you know the single characteristics to look for. So let's start with the native one. Let's start with the native one. I know you haven't got this on your list, Will, but I'd like to start with the native one. That's field maple. This is field maple. So field maple, this was the biggest field maple leaf I could find. It's not that big. It's sort of half a hand. Most field maple leaves are much smaller. So they're about this size. And field maple is like all aces. It's got these distinctive lobe leaves, 3 or 5 obvious lobes. They're known in botanical terms as palmate, but what palmate means is like the palm of a hand, exactly as Will says, like the palm of a hand. So almost all the aces, all the maples have palmate leaves, palm-shaped leaves, and it's about their size. So this is a field maple, and this is a sycamore, and you can see that they are significantly different in size. This one also has jagged edges, which this one does not. So separating a sycamore from a field maple is actually quite easy on the size of the leaf alone, but it's also quite easy on the seeds. I'm just going to find my field maple seeds. I've got a whole pile of stuff here and I've got to mix them up. That's sycamore. Where's my field maple leaves? Talk amongst yourself for a second while I just locate my field maple seeds. I cannot find them. That's not going to work. They'll emerge out of the foliage in a second. I don't know what I'm doing. There they are. I picked them up. So, field maple seeds are pretty much in a straight line. I need to just separate these off. Can you see? I also managed to bring in quite a lot of shield bugs in with these leaves, and they seem to be taking flying lessons around my room. Can you see those seeds are in a straight line, Will? Can you see that it's basically straight line? Well, if you compare that with a sycamore, a pair of sycamore seeds, which are all, because they're all ripe, they're all breaking up in my hands. a pair of sycamore seeds are at a very different angle. Can you see that? So straight line for field maple and small leaves, and sycamore has a V-shaped, very different shape. The only other one that you might just see in a hedge is a Norway maple, and this is a Norway. You can't mistake that for a field maple. It's just, you know, they're just completely different. As I say, there's the field maple for comparison, just a completely different thing.
They're much spikier, aren't they, than sycamore?
Yeah.
That's how I've always, if it's got a big long spike on the end of it, it looks like a sycamore, but with a very big spike. It's more like to be a Norway maple.
Exactly. Well, and that's exactly how you do it. They just are much more spiky, but the seeds are also, again, very distinctive, and these are much more like field maple in that they're in a straight line. Can you see that? So even though the leaves are quite similar, the seeds are much more like those of a field maple. So they're in a straight line. So if you can remember those, just remember the seeds. You know, straight line for field maple and small, straight line for Norway maple, and V-shaped for a sycamore. That's how you do it. Just those one simple characteristics, and then it all suddenly starts to fall into shape.
Okay.
At this time of year, the sycamores also have very distinctive fungal disease, which is this. It's called tar spot. And it looks like little spots of tar on the leaves, which doesn't happen with either of the others. It's distinctive to sycamore. So again, if you see big black spots on the leaves, that will be the tar spot on a sycamore.
And I think we should move to our two most common hedgerow trees.
Okay.
There are similar size to a big sycamore, because the sycamore can get massive as well.
Yep.
They are the old favourite English oak.
Yep.
And also an ash trees, because they can get very big, and they're in a lot of our hedgerows.
So let's do ash. Ash is obviously suffering at the moment with ash dieback. Many of you will see that the ash is looking quite unwell. It's losing its leaves. It has this is one leaf. Do you remember the elder with its pinnate leaf? Well, this is an ash with its pinnate leaf. That's all one leaf. Again, really quite distinctive. But what you need to do with ash is you need to just look at the buds. And this is going to, I don't know if we're going to be able to quite see that clearly. But can you see the buds? They're jet black.
It probably emphasises the point we can't see them.
Can't see them
no, we can see them. They're black. They're jet black.
I'll put them there so that you can see it against the white of the door. You see the jet black bud? Well, that's your one characteristic. There is nothing else out there with black buds. The black buds are there all year round. If you go and look for the black buds, it's an ash. End of, full stop. You don't need to worry, and you can do that winter, summer, easy as that. It's got black buds. It's an ash tree. Louise said to me the other day, and I had never heard this before, despite having done this for 30 years. She said, the way I remember it is that the ash has got burnt buds. So they're ashy, like it's been burnt. And that's really rather nice. And if you remember, burnt tips equals ash. It's as easy as that. I see Catherine's asked about hornbeam. Did we do beech? Have we done beech yet?
We've done beech, yes. Well, so we haven't done beech, but we are including beech.
We're going to do beech, are we, in a second? So Catherine, I'll tell you how
we could do it. We could do it now if you want, when we can go back to oak.
Since Catherine's asked, let's do beech. Beech. Can you pull up the picture for beech, please, Will? Because it might be an easier one to show.
There we go.
So beech have got these very beautiful, in the spring, light green leaves, and they have these distinctive long buds that are again are really quite distinctive. Big trees, but as I said right at the beginning, smooth grey bark is the way to remember beech. But from the leaves, you can learn something to separate them from hornbeam. And if you can take that down now, please, Will. I've got a hornbeam, knowing that this might come up. So this is a beech leaf, and it's the light's not brilliant, but you can see that it's relatively flat. And this is a hornbeam. Can you see it's much more undulating. It has many more crevices and grooves on that upper surface. It almost feels like a washboard, for those of you old enough to remember what a washboard might look like. It has ridges, all right, very, very distinctive ridges, which are there all year round. The beech doesn't. And again, just touch the leaf. They might look very similar, but just touch them. If it feels smooth and flat, it's a beech. If it feels rough and almost, as I say, undulating, it's a hornbeam. And to reinforce that, the bark of a beech is flat and smooth and grey. The bark of a hornbeam has almost like stretch marks in it. You can see undulations in the surface of the bark. So it's again, just like the leaves, it's rough and goes up and down in a way that does not happen. So beech, flat, still, calm, like a sandy beech. This hornbeam, much rougher, both the bark and the leaves. Hopefully that helps, Carolyn.
Brilliant.
Yeah, they are the same family, Limsey. They're basically all part of the same family. Sorry, Catherine, I meant about the hornbeam. They are part of the same family, and that's why they look really quite similar.
Brilliant. Should we go back to the oak?
We were going to do oak, weren't we?
The favourite.
The favourite. I think almost everybody probably knows what an oak is. He says, trying desperately to find his oak leaves because he's made a mess of his own table. Can he find it? There it is. I think everybody knows what an oak looks like. It's a very, very distinct, again, the botanical term is lobed. But what lobed means is it's got these big undulations in the surface of the leaf. And the way you tell the English oaks apart from the sessile oak in the West, English is two things. It's whether the acorns have stalks or not, and whether the leaves have stalks or not. So if you've got a picture there, Will.
I do.
Might be easier to show folk with a picture for this one.
Can you see that?
I can. And on an English oak, you will see that the acorn is on a long, it's called a peduncle. No, sorry, what's it called? Stalk.
A petiole.
No, I can't remember the proper name for it. Complete brain. James, help me. Tell me what an acorn is sitting on. But in English oak, the acorn sits on a long stalk, but the leaves have no stalks. The leaves, the base of the leaves have no stalks. In sessile oaks, which is the one in the west of the country, that situation reverses. So the acorns have no stalks and the leaves have long stalks. So there's a very long stalk on the other species. So that's how you tell them apart. Just look at the length of the stalk on the leaf or the length of the stalk on the acorn. And you will get, it becomes second nature after a while. You just know it, even if you can't remember. No, it's not PTL, that's leaf. Just having a complete. Louise, look it up. What does an acorn sit on? I can't remember. Tell me.
Are we sure it's not? Are we sure it's not petiole?
It might be.
Catherine said petiole.
They do hybridize, and that's, as I say, it is a petiole. Okay, all right. I'm having one of those senior moments that happens when you're peduncle. Yes, thank you, James.
Peduncle. Okay.
Yes, they do hybridize, and you can get rose oaks. So you can get these hybrids between them. You can have acorns with no stalks and leaves with no stalks. That's one form of rose oak, and the other is that you can have stalks on the acorns and stalks on the leaves. That's another form of rose oak. so that they can be absolutely somewhere in the middle. They're not common, but they are out there. And sometimes in a wood where they are both, they can actually become the majority. In the West Country, there are woods with more rose oaks than there are anything else, because the parents have just hybridized. No, it doesn't. It means that, sorry, the question is, if they hybridize, are they sterile? No, they carry on producing acorns, and then they they hybridize back to the original parents, and it becomes a mess, a genetic mess, but basically they all carry on quite happily growing. And that has happened in the woods of the West Country. There's another insect flying around the office.
Before one lands on you, we'll go from the most English tree that we have, the English oak, and we'll go to our oldest tree. So could you tell us about a yew tree, and how we identify that?
I think most people will, I would hope most people will know what a yew is. It's one of the only 3 native conifers that we've got in the country. This is a yew, very distinctive, dark green leaves, little needles, and at this time of the year they carry these red fruit. The red fruit is most people think of it as a berry, but it's actually a form of cone. And in the middle of this little berry, there is a small black seed called an aril. And every part of a yew tree is poisonous, except, ironically, this red bit. The red bit is actually really quite tasty. I'm not going to eat it live on the screen, but it is actually quite tasty, quite sugary, quite sweet. The trouble is, contained within it is the little black seed, the aril, and that's the most poisonous bit of the whole tree. So you must, if you ever choose to eat one of these to see what they taste like, just make sure you take out the black bit in the middle, because that's the most poisonous bit of the whole tree.
I believe it's cyanide, is it?
Yeah,
I believe it's cyanide.
And what happens is often the birds eat the berries whole, and then to avoid themselves being poisoned by the arils, they actually then often they absorb some of the sugars from the berries, and then there's no polite way of saying it, they vomit it all up again. And so song thrushes often vomit great quantities of this, but they've absorbed some of the nutrients before they throw it all up, just to avoid themselves getting poisoned.
Just a quick one, just for people who might not know what conifers are. Can you tell us what a conifer is?
Sorry, my sister is running, which is deeply embarrassing. I forgot to turn off the the vagaries of doing these things. A conifer is a tree that produces cones. Okay. So
a pine tree, Christmas tree.
A pine tree. Yes. Where it gets slightly complicated, and we go back to yes, thank you, Louise. When we go back to alders again, alder is one of the few broad-leafed conifers in that alder produces a cone. Okay. So it gets a bit complicated. Let's not go there. We'll get completely blown off track. I think we've got about 10 minutes left, I think.
So I think that brings us nicely onto just a few of the climbers, which aren't actually trees, but we will probably find in our hedgerows.
Yes.
So we've got a few on screen here, and I believe you've got a few samples as well.
I think probably you can get most of these from the screen, Will.
Yeah. Okay.
So ivy is ivy. Most people know ivy in that. Oh, you want to start with dog rose? Sorry. Okay.
No, that's all right. I've put ivy on. There we
go. Ivy is ivy. Most people recognise ivy. This time of year, it has lots of flowers, which are attracting the insect that's there, which is a relatively newly arrived bee called an ivy bee, which is taking up residence in the UK. Thousands and thousands of ivy bees out there at the moment, but they weren't here even a few years ago. They then produce the berries that you can see on the right that are eaten by a lot of animals and birds during the winter. So ivy, I would think most people know as a relatively common thing. You may not know that there is another species called Atlantic ivy, which is found in the west of the country. But to all intents and purposes, for most people, all you need to know is ivy has these big green leaves and these very distinctive yellow flowers at this time of year. Really, really important stuff for. Go on.
I know quite a lot of people have think that ivy is parasitic or actually bad for trees and shrubs and things like that. That's a bit of a misconception, isn't it?
It is. And if I had £1 for everybody who said to me, does ivy kill trees? The answer is ivy doesn't kill trees. The tree has to be sick for the ivy to get hold. As James has just said, ivy cover is good for bats, fantastic habitat for bats. And they are the latest flowers out there in the countryside. So you need to learn to love ivy. One of the greatest misconceptions, that thing about strangling trees, has been there almost since the year dot. And Carl Linnaeus, who created the Linnaean Society, gave us the heterohelix, this two-named system of naming plants, stood up at the Royal Society in London in the mid-18th century and said, why is it the British believe that ivy kills trees? I see no evidence of that. And we've carried on for 250 years believing it's a problem for reasons I just don't understand. So yes, it can finally swamp a tree that's sick, but only if the tree was already sick. It won't kill a healthy one.
And I think most people might know ivy if they see it, but if they want to identify it,
big oval
look at these heart-shaped leaves. Yeah.
Big oval heart-shaped leaves, yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So we'll go back to our dog rose.
Dog rose, there are lots and lots of roses out there in the countryside. And they're not all that simple. So I wouldn't worry too much about whether they're dog roses, just they're all wild roses, creeping roses. There are lots of different species out there. You can identify them by the nature of their thorns, by the shape of their flowers, by the color of their rose hips. But in the end, I can't do them. I can't do most of them. So just think of them as wild roses, and you'll, for most people, that's enough. There are many, many species though.
It's the thorns, isn't it?
Yeah, it's the thorns, a big curved, just like roses in your garden. But show us bramble, please, Will. Because this is the one. I got
a dormouse in there again.
Yeah, exactly. This is the one that confuses many people. If you know the answer to this, everybody, if you've heard somebody like me tell you the answer to this, everybody, don't answer. But we're going to have a quick straw poll. Will's got on the screen there bramble, which is blackberry, as you all well know. How many different blackberries are there in the British countryside? Quick straw poll. Stick your numbers in the chat box. How many different types of bramble do you think there are out there in the British country? 86 from Louise, 1 from Lindsay, 300 from Terry, 200, 15, 400, 350, 356, 12, 8, 3, 570. You haven't got a clue, have you? That's a massive range from 1 to 570. There was 1 or 2 of you, however, that were really quite close. And the answer is there's just over 326 different species of blackberry out there in the British countryside, native ones. There are others that are introduced, and our forager the other day talked about 500 different ones. There probably are 500 out there. But native species to Britain, there's 326. And the reason that you pick a bramble, pick a blackberry, and then you walk down the hedge and you think, I like that one, and you walk down the hedge and you try another one and it tastes completely different, and you think, oh, I don't like that one, and you go on a little bit further and it tastes different and you think, oh, I like that one, is that it'll be a different species. So the one you've eaten 100 yards back the hedge is probably a different one than you're eating now. and you need to remember where the good ones were, because there are so many different species out there that finding the ones that appeal to your palate is a bit of an art. You need to go and eat as many blackberries as you can at this time of year to see what they are. And Lindsay said he's always disappointed when he gets a sour one. Well, probably, Lindsay, walk him 50 yards down the hedge and try him on something else, and it will probably be a much sweeter one. It is quite a remarkable, little understood bit of British botany, and I can't do them. I think there's about 5 people in the country that can do brambles. So I wouldn't worry too much, except that just realise they are different species.
I've got a more simple question, John, and that's who would win in a spiky fight between a bramble, a blackthorn, a hawthorn, a holly, or a dog rose?
I don't know that I'd want to find out, if I'm honest.
I'm going for the dog rose.
I think on the scare factor, I'd go with blackthorns, as I've said earlier. I think bramble is the one that always cuts me up and makes me bleed. So I think I'd probably go for bramble as my least favourite of all of them out there. Okay. We've been doing questions as the chat's been coming up, but I don't know if anybody actually put any questions. Only James, which is good because we've been dealing as we come along. Witches and holly, James says, came from Roman folklore. But holly near houses and barns would ward off poisons, diseases, and they were, of course, associated with witches. That's probably it, James. It is just one of those bits of folklore that seems to be pertinent in your Herefordian part of the country. So brambles are definitely native, Graham. As I say, there are 326 different native species out there. So entirely natural, grown here forever. It's part of it is, again, that hybridization thing, and some of them are what we might call micro species rather than full different distinct species. But you have to be a genuine bramble expert to be able to tell most of them apart. And then we've got old man's beard, clematis, growing in the hedges, and it's got this very distinctive old man's beard that makes it so obvious at this time of year. It's a very beautiful part of the countryside. Smells lovely, fantastic for moths in the high summer. Absolutely part of many hedgerows. And in some parts of the country, these things are really abundant. So I hope what we've given you this evening, because we're nearly out of time, is a bit of a flavour of how to ID some of these things. Those tips we can put on our website later, but most of them are in the Good Tree Growers Guide. So if you want to have most of those, as I say, you can buy it from the shop if you'd like a hard copy, or you can pick it up from the 17th as a free download. Most of the tips to ID that I've given you this evening are in that book, so you shouldn't need to struggle too much, or go out and find yourself the Reader's Digest, which will really help you with some of those things. So do you want to take that one down for the sec, Will, and I think we'll say cheerio to everybody.
Yeah. Well,
thank you for listening, folks. I think we dealt with many of your questions. I'm sorry if I missed any, because they were coming through in the middle quite thick and fast. If there's anything that you really want an answer for, we'll stay for a couple of minutes to answer everything. But if not, thank you for being here. And Will, did you want to talk about tomorrow?
Yes, absolutely. I'd first like to say that if you do have any hedge related questions and you kind of you go offline and think, oh, I wish I'd asked that, you can send those to us on hedgerows@treecouncil.org.uk, and that'll come through to us and we can get back to you. Yes, tomorrow we've got the last of our talks for the week, which is called Feathers and Fur, and that's to do with dormice and birds in hedgerows, and that's with Ian White from the People's Trust for Endangered Species, and Lucy Lapwing, who's she's a conservationist. She's worked on Spring Watch, all kinds of things. She's amazing. So if you don't already know where the tickets are, you can go to www.nationalhedgerowweek.org.uk, or you can go through our website, which is www.treecouncil.org.uk, and find tickets there. But yeah, thank you very much.
And I would heartily recommend it. They're both fabulous speakers, so do have a good listen tomorrow night for our last of this week. Thank you all for being there, and thank you for such nice comments. We hope you enjoyed it. We hope it gave you a little bit of a flavour to how to identify some of our common things out there in the hedges. Take care all.
Thank you. Bye.